For more than 40 years, one of Australia's most infamous cold cases was just this painful, unanswered question. It's a story about a wife and a mother who just vanished, a husband who was always under suspicion, and a fight for justice that took decades to resolve. Today, we're going to break down the long, long road to finally convicting Chris Dawson. You know what? Let's actually start at the very end of this long, winding story. Because just recently, after all the trials, the media frenzy, and decades of waiting, Australia's highest court rejected Chris Dawson's final appeal. What that means is, legally, it's over. His guilt is final, and the case is officially closed.
But that brings us to the central mystery that puzzled everyone for so long. And it's the question we're going to tackle in this explainer. With no body, no murder weapon, not even a confession, how on earth did prosecutors build a case strong enough to prove a 40-year-old murder beyond a reasonable doubt?
To answer that, we've got to go all the way back to where this whole thing began, the summer of 1982 on Sydney's beautiful, sunny northern beaches. Okay, so you've got three key players at the heart of this. First, there's Chris Dawson. He was a really charismatic PE teacher, a former football star, the popular guy. Then there's his wife, Lynette, a devoted mom to their two little girls. And finally, a teenage girl, known in court only as JC. She was one of Chris's students, and she was also the family's babysitter. Now, take a look at this timeline, because the sequence of events is just incredibly fast and honestly super suspicious. On January 8th, Lynette talks to her mom on the phone. That's the last time anyone ever hears from her. Just 2 days later, Chris Dawson's teenage lover, JC, moves into the family home. And, into Lynette's bed. But here's the real kicker. Dawson doesn't even report his wife missing for 6 whole weeks. With zero forensic evidence, I'm talking no body, no weapon, nothing. Prosecutors had to build their entire case on circumstantial evidence. So what does that even mean? It means they had to piece together a chain of events, a story so compelling and so tight that it left no other reasonable explanation except that Chris Dawson killed his wife. And right at the core of their argument was motive. The judge who finally convicted Dawson, Justice Ian Harrison, he put it really plainly in his verdict. He said it wasn't just some affair. It was a possessive infatuation. Dawson was completely obsessed with his teenage student, and the fear of losing her was so overwhelming that, in the judge's own words, he resolved to kill his wife. So how did the judge actually get there? Well, he pretty much built the verdict on 4 key pillars. First, the motive we just talked about. Second was Lynette's character. The court was totally convinced she adored her 2 little girls and would never, ever have just walked away from them. Third were Dawson's flat-out lies about getting phone calls from Lynette after she disappeared. And fourth, a clear, consistent pattern of deception that was just designed to cover his tracks. And this is how his whole story just completely unraveled in court. He claimed Lynette just left on her own. The court called that frail speculation. He claimed she called him afterwards. The judge found that simply absurd, calling it a clear lie to create a false trail. Basically, every single claim he made was just dismantled, revealing this pattern of lies all designed to hide one thing: his real motive of starting a new life with JC. But here's the wild part. Despite all these suspicions, for decades, nothing. The case went completely cold. So what was the catalyst? What finally reignited this whole thing and led to an arrest? You can just imagine the frustration for Lynette's family. 2 separate corneal inquests, one in 2001 and another in 2003, came to the exact same conclusion. Lynette Dawson was murdered by someone she knew. Both recommended that Chris Dawson be charged with murder, but both times the state's top prosecutor said no, arguing that the evidence, while suspicious, just wasn't strong enough to guarantee a conviction. And then, in 2018, everything, and I mean everything, changed. A true crime podcast called The Teacher's Pet came out, and it meticulously detailed the whole case. It didn't just get popular, it became a global phenomenon, downloaded nearly 30 million times. And it didn't just retell an old story, it actually helped uncover new leads and, maybe most importantly, created this enormous public pressure on authorities to finally do something. And guess what? That pressure worked. Police renewed their investigation, and in December 2018, 36 years after his wife vanished, Chris Dawson was arrested and charged with her murder. It was this stunning development that, frankly, a lot of people thought would never, ever happen. The arrest led to a conviction, which was huge. But the impact of this case didn't stop there. It actually became a major driving force behind a really significant change in Australian law. A change aimed right at convicted killers who refused to give their victims' families any kind of peace. These are known as no body, no parole laws. The idea is simple, but it's really powerful. If you're convicted of murder and you refuse to tell police where you put your victim's body, then you will not even be considered for parole. Simple as that. And this is exactly why this case matters so much, even beyond the verdict. The massive public profile of the Chris Dawson case was a key reason the government of New South Wales strengthened these laws in 2022. It brought the state in line with other places and helps ensure killers can't just stay silent and still hope to get out early.
So the final sentence for Chris Dawson was 24 years in prison. But when you factor in those new no body, no parole laws, plus his age, he won't even be eligible for parole until he's 93. The reality is, he is almost certainly going to die in jail.
So 40 years later, the justice system has delivered its final answer. But this story kind of leaves us with one last haunting question, doesn't it? The legal case might be closed, but for Lynette's daughters, her family, and everyone who loved her, can that search for peace ever really end as long as she's still out there somewhere missing?